Well, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Growth Center, I just want to thank Andrew Ginsberg, Pam Gifford for joining us today. Andrew, Pam, it is good seeing both of you guys.
It's great to be here. Thanks. Hey, Pam.
Hi, Andrew. It's great to be here, Tommy. Good to see you. Hello, everyone.
For those who are jumping on, I actually would love for each one of the group members to share a little bit about themselves. Pam, I'm actually going to start with you. Can you share a little bit about what you're currently now and what you're doing now and just your journey in terms of communications?
Sure. Currently, I am working for a few clients doing communications work kind of all over the board. And that's following 7 years I was home with my daughter. I was a stay-at-home mom, moved to where I grew up outside the Chicago suburbs, and kind of poured into the community, did a lot of volunteering, but I missed the work I do. I love telling stories. I love communication. So kind of organically came back to a few clients, including Resource Global and many others. So before that, though, I had a career in corporate communications. I was on the West Coast with Hill and Knowlton Communications. I joined a client, HP, at the time, telling the story of what they were doing in philanthropy all over the world. So I had a lot of corporate experience on the West Coast. And then I moved to Washington, D.C. to lead the Communications for International Justice mission several years ago, and just had a wonderful time getting to know that world and helping them tell their stories about what they were doing all over the world. So kind of a corporate nonprofit, and I started at a university communications background, took a little break, and now I'm back kind of just making it work.
Thank you, Pam. Hey, Andrew, you and I have known each other. It's now year 11 with your role at Intervarsity. Share a little bit of what you're doing for Intervarsity now, but also what you were doing before that.
Yeah, I'm tired from hearing all that Pam's done. I am my title is Executive Vice President and Chief Development Officer. So I'm half my role with Intervarsity is general stewardship for the movement overall, and then the other half is specifically around all things development and communications. And I didn't start this way. I started in new medicine development in pharmaceuticals and biotech. And when I left college and entered my career, I was not a believer. I grew up Jewish, and it was 5 years later with college ministry still following me down my path that I came to the Lord. So I had already begun this career in healthcare and loved it, and did that through pharmaceuticals and biotechs for 23 years. And then around 11 years ago, the call was dramatic with light shows and fireworks, and so I came to Intervarsity this time vocationally instead of as someone who was investing in the Lord.
Got it. Andrew, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah.
COVID has really changed the dimension of everything that we're doing. 5-year plans has now been reduced to 1-year plans, to 6 months plan, to week is always changing. For you as a Chief Development Officer overseeing fundraising, what are some basic tips as we head into the end of the year fundraising you would give to ministry or nonprofits in your area of fundraising?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm gonna guess at our audience's sort of reason for showing up at noon on a Tuesday. If you're a little bit like a lot of the people at Intervarsity who raise funds, you might be thinking we're struggling a little bit financially.
Yeah.
Or you might be thinking, everybody's asking for money right now. How am I going to fit into the noise? Or you might be thinking, how can I ask people in the midst of a pandemic or a triple pandemic? I mean, racial injustice, the mental health issues that are going on in our country right now, along with the actual COVID pandemic. How can I ask in the midst of this? And so we've had to talk a lot about that in Intervarsity and also in other ministries I've been talking about. So I wanted to say to you that what you do really matters. It matters enormously in the kingdom, and you might need to get yourself excited about that now as a first step. So there might be sort of an emotional foundation, Tommy, to being able to aggressively go into the last 6 weeks of the year, because the opportunities is incredible for the kingdom right now. I mean, so despite that it's a really hard time and that plans are changing, I'll assume that those who are listening have a plan and know why their mission matters right now, and probably even know why it matters more. And we need to articulate that powerfully. So once we've gotten ourselves in the right place, how do we articulate powerfully the message to those who might give? In this moment, people are giving more when they're asked, but a lot of people are afraid to ask. And so I'm sure we'll talk more, Tommy, about what do you do with someone who's lost their job? I mean, that's a different ballgame. But in general, communicating aggressively with a time-specific message about why your mission creates a kingdom impact right now.
Which goes to Pam as well, too, especially as a communication pro. Is Pam, what are some of those things that you would really be able to do if you were in that seat or as you work with different clients? How do we message our campaign even now as we head into the new year?
Well, I think I'd piggyback on a lot of what Andrew said. Just hopefully you have a plan, probably if you're listening, and you understand that this is kind of the culmination of a conversation, not the start of one. There's a lot of pressure at this time of year. This isn't necessarily the time to be scrambling and starting to talk to your donors and supporters, but you probably thought of that earlier, and hopefully sometime in the summer or into early fall, you're really gearing up for the end of the year so that, you have a relationship all year long. It's really about the relationship and the conversation that you've had with your supporters all along, not just sort of towards the end of the year. And I think just acknowledging the times and being really authentic in your communication. This is a lot of people are scared. I've been scared. There's a lot of uncertainty. Like you said, the planning is not 5 years, it's 1 year. And so just being honest about that. But I think also giving people a pathway forward. I think people are looking for that. I think there's a lot that we can't control. So I acknowledge that. But here are a couple of things as a communicator you can control. You can control the story you're telling at the end of the year, the sort of vision that you're casting. And so I think it's a really great time to double down on that vision. People give to vision, they follow vision. And, you might have been communicating it all year, but what a great time to say, this has been a little crazy, but here's where we're going. And here's how we think we're going to get there. And it's not going to be easy, but I think giving people a pathway forward is really great, especially at this year.
Yeah. God, you mentioned a lot of times the vision, the pathway forward, everything like that. Do you also talk about the challenges, Pam? Do you talk about here's what we're doing, here's how we're cutting, or here's where we're struggling? Or would you recommend that, hey, man, I would really recommend more of the vision and a lot of times the solutions to what we're trying to do?
Definitely being authentic. I very much skew to the being very authentic and transparent. And actually, Tommy, I think you do this very well. Just say sort of, this is where we are. This is what's going well. These are the great leaders we have in place at different parts of the world. If you work at a global ministry or whatever it might be. And but this is the hard part. This is the challenge, and not shy away from being really honest about that. I think that builds trust, and you're pulling back the curtain. That's kind of what we're doing for Resource Global. One of my clients at the end of this year, we're doing like a state of the mission, like pull back the curtain. Here's where we are. This has been a difficult year, but here's where here's how we can set ourselves up well for next year. This is what we're thinking. And it's, inviting them into the conversation of how we are moving forward. So I would definitely, skew to the being very transparent. Don't hide the challenges.
Yeah. Andrew, I'm not sure what you think. A lot of times I always tell Pam is when I communicate with our donors, I like to be very honest about our struggles, our issues, but here's where we're going and how we're going to cut it, because our donors are part of the network and the family, and they know that everything is not going to be perfect. But can I show them what we're trying to do to pivot, but realistic solutions? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not going to blow against the wind of authenticity or integrity. That absolutely is a foundational starting place. I would say this: what we can do in our investment to be sort of overly present to the issues we're having in the organization is to forget the end goals of what we're doing and the impact of what we're doing. And so absolutely tell the truth. And I don't mean that silly. I mean, explain the landscape of what's happening in the organization. And we believe that we can do this and it will have these impacts. Pam said, people give. So people give to vision. People also give to change lives and save lives. So it's meaningfully harder to give to keep the lights on. It's meaningfully harder to give because we can't figure out how to pivot against campuses don't open. So you say, campuses aren't open. This is really hard. We're trying to figure out at Intervarsity how we're gonna minister to students on campus when they're not. That's really tough. Here's the things that we think we can do, and here's what we see as the potential impact on screen. And guess what? People are coming to the Lord by being asked on a screen, like the Lord can work through monitors. So I mean, you start with the reality for sure, but I would take it to the place of the opportunity for impassioned giving.
Yeah. Hey, Andrew, for you, a lot of times I go back to our conversation with our donors. There are people who have done really, really well during this COVID time in terms of financially, people who have struggled. How do you be able to communicate with both groups?
Yeah. I was going to say you walk into the living room, but when nobody's walking into any living rooms these days, you pick up the phone with care and investment on your mind, right? I mean, so how are you is the first 15 minutes of any conversation, or maybe 5 minutes. I don't know who's on with what kinds of conversations, but you start with trying to understand what's happening for the potential donor or investor. And then that will tree your conversation. We've had every time this happens, I feel like I hear about it. We've had so many donors who have COVID giving to Intervarsity, and what they very often do is they give and then they explain they have COVID, and it bombs us out every time. Like, how could you give? Well, 99. I mean, I don't mean to be political, but 99% of the people are going to live, and when you have COVID, you desperately want to have an impact on the things around you. And so if you can give when you have COVID, you can give when you're not fully employed. You can give, I mean, there's let's not say no for donors. Let's first engage them on how they are and love them really well, but then give them an invitation and allow for no. And sometimes you don't give an invitation. Oh, I'm out of a job. Oh, well, how can I love you? How can I care well for you? You want a book? You want what do you need? Yeah. But then if it's not that, in every other case, you can allow someone to say, yeah, you know what? As hard as things are, I really want to be a part of this. I really want to make a difference. Yeah.
No, and for you, Pam, is how do you, I know a lot of times we're going to talk to you about the general emails as well too, but the personalized emails, personalized communications to a specific group of major donors. Any tips as you're communicating to this particular group during this time? And we'll talk about social media and general emails and all that stuff in a bit.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with what Andrew was saying about just listening, like that active listening, like, how are you? Just really approaching it with a genuine concern of where they are. And I think that's the first step. And then I know I struggle with this myself, but staying in that abundance mindset. I can even, as I approach the end of this year, thinking about different clients and there's going to be a lot of noise and a lot of people have lost a lot of money. We tend to, as humans, we can go to the scarcity side of it.
Yeah.
And I thought, I had to remind myself to have an abundance mindset. It's been a hard year for some. It's been a great year financially for others. I think challenging for everyone all around, but you just never know. And I think sometimes we self-select out of gospel work, well, this won't work, we're the Eeyores of the planning process, and God, could have very different plans. We don't know. So we come at it with abundance mindset. That's how I think I would for both people who have done well or not doing well. And I think the second thing, the approach that we're taking this year is really how can we bless people in the communications that we have at the end of the year. So, we've been looking back at some of the great teachings from the last year at Resource Global, some of the things from earlier events, and we're putting those together and we're going to share them during the week of Thanksgiving just to bless people. It's not to ask them for money necessarily. It's just this enlightened us as a staff, as a team. So we thought you would like this. So that's part of coming at it and agree with what Andrew said, just really finding out where they are and going on that journey with them.
With the general emails or a lot of times general communications, Pam, what is your recommendation? You now have to send out emails. You want to do some mailers. You want to get your social media. For those who are sitting there, they're sitting there. Mostly if you have a big team and you have someone specifically with social media, you have someone doing, that's great. But we're talking about the medium-sized startup organizations who may be listening to this. How much do I do? How much time do I do? What's the best bang for my buck? Should I spend some time mailing out different letters? Should I email? How much should I email during this period of time? Social media, do I put all my money on social media, especially with Giving Tuesday? Any tips as you're headed into these, especially if you're the only one trying to do all of these different things?
Oh, I have been there. I am there. I've had like big teams and big budgets and no team and no budget. So I get that. Those are great questions. And it really just depends. I mean, I always start with sort of the audiences in mind. Different audiences are going to have different priorities. And we, like to go so far as to kind of name them. Like if it's a young woman in her 30s is someone who's a supporter, kind of what's her name? What does she care about? What is she thinking about at this time of year, or any time of year? It helps me to put a face to an audience, like a literal person. So I kind of start thinking about, maybe 3 big buckets of audiences. And this is if you're a smaller shop and you're kind of having to do everything by yourself. The 2 or 3 big groups of people that you want to communicate with. What do they care about? We sometimes start with what would we love them to do, think, or feel like by the end of the year, and then back up your plans from that. I think this is a great year to go tangible. Mail them something in the mail, a thank you gift, a card. Since we're all isolated and everyone likes to get mail, that's one good strategy. But I think I would, based on the audience, think about what will authentically answer the questions they might have about your ministry. I think emails are great. I like the tangible letters or phone calls or those kinds of communications, and the social media, a whole different other creation. There's so many different programs that allow you to set up for the month of December, if that's what you're focusing on. And I would keep those simple. And again, back to blessing people. Maybe it's a short story. I would say why the founder of the ministry is encouraged. That's back to my corporate days where, media reporters would always want to ask, what keeps you up at night? They want to know what keeps the CEO up at night. And I think it's the same in ministry. What keeps you up at night, or why, to turn it around, why do you have hope at the end of this year? Why are you encouraged as we're going into 2021? And maybe that's your social media. So I think I would try to keep it simple and really just focus on answering the questions they might have. Again, pointing them the way forward. These are our challenges. Here's where we're going to go. But I could do a whole bunch of conversations on that. Those are like lots of different strategies. I would say just keeping it simple and blessing them. But I love to talk about it, so I'll stop and let Andrew cue in if he has something to say.
Well, but the one thing I would say to you, Pam, is that a lot of times as you send out all of these emails, just know that people may be inundated with all of this stuff and they won't respond. So in some sense, understand they may be reading it, but you have to frequently communicate it. They may actually still make a gift, but never respond too.
Yes. And a couple of things. I saw a statistic about, it said something like 12% of giving is in the last 3 days of December or something like that. It was really a surprising statistic that, people can be undecided. They're busy. This is a really hectic season. And I love the analogy of the waitress with the cup of coffee approach. In other words, she's never offended if she comes by, would you like more coffee? Would you like more coffee? And someone will say no, no, no. And then at some point they say yes. And it's time to fill the coffee cup. So I kind of look at some of the communications of being sensitive, but just ask and, just keep going. You might hit the right one at the right time in that last 3 days of December. You never know.
Andrew, going back to donor development, especially with some of your major donors, I had 2 major donor conversations. One with someone who has supported us for a long time. I asked him for a particular gift and he says, hey, Tommy, we are struggling as a business right now. I'm not saying no, but you've done a good job of communicating to us. And so come back to me in mid-February or no, mid-November, and I want to let you know if I could do it or not. Totally great. Another person says, man, we are stretched out in our commitments. So this year it will have to be a no. And so in some sense for you, I mean, you and Intervarsity have done a great job of really be able to cultivate and honor donors, but yet at the same time, and for those and being their friends, but for those, how do you pivot from cultivating, caring for donors, and knowing when to make an ask? What would you say to that, Andrew?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna just gen off of Pam here because I just love the waiter waitress analogy. I mean, it reminds me of diakonos, right? Which is the deacon comes from those who serve tables, and it's those who care for the church. I think it's almost a false dichotomy that you're giving me a little thing here, Tommy, and I'm going to slam it now. I think there's a kind of a false dichotomy between cultivate and ask.
Yeah.
My sense is what we're helping, especially major donors, do is do what they want to do. They have a philanthropic urge. They care deeply about the kingdom. They want to figure out where and how to give in a way that will bring them, that will bring the kingdom transformation and also bring them joy. And so what we're doing in the cultivation is helping them determine when, how, and how much would be just right for them, and to what would be just right for them. So when the cultivation isn't schmoozing, which we all know is not the game, rather it's identifying together, discipling, maybe even toward where passion areas are for kingdom change, then the ask becomes really the what is that stone? The keystone? Is that the top one? That stone at the top, where it's already set up. I mean, we've been talking about how and where and why they want to give, and we're just helping them. That's cultivation all the way through the ask and actually through the reporting. The whole thing is just we like to use the body of Christ imagery. 1 Corinthians 12, Romans 12, Ephesians 4. We're all in the body of Christ. Jesus is the head. The donor's not the head, and we're like begging. I mean, we're all in the body of Christ trying to help each other do the things that we want to be doing. One of the things that donors do is they give. And so we're helping.
Andrew, I love, in some sense, a lot of times what you're saying is that every single donor that we meet with has a certain passion that the Lord has given to them. Our job is to listen and honor that donor. So if I sit there and talk with Pam, and every single time I talk with her, she's telling me about orphans and kids and her passion because she has a daughter, everything like that. But here I am later on, I say, hey, Pam, I really need to upgrade our computer systems. She's probably going to look at me and says, you really didn't listen to me, did you? We have to listen and honor our donors and find, and sometimes maybe it doesn't fall under our organization, but maybe there's other like-minded organizations that fit well with them. But it is caring for them and really be able to work with those guys on it.
Yeah. You know what that takes? I'll just add one thing is it's faith. Has the Lord prepared the mission in front of us? Will he resource it? Can I be gracious in giving and lose a gift to my ministry to someone else because I know that he's here and that I'll have what I need? Those are really hard questions. Those are super discipleship questions for a major gift and officer type person.
Yeah. Andrew, actually, go ahead, Pam.
Well, I was just going to add one thing to what Andrew said. I love the body of Christ analogy that he used, and it reminded me of, as communications, major donor fundraising, I heard somebody call it like you're on this bridge and you're bridging the donor and the sort of work that's happening in the field or whatever it might be. And you have this amazing vantage point, if you imagine that bridge on a hill. So you can see the work that's happening and tell the donors, but also you can see how it's blessing them to give and to be connected with the mission. And I thought, well, that's a really neat way to think of what we're doing in this season as fundraisers or communicators, is just kind of be that bridge. And it like you said, Andrew, it's not like, worry about begging or this or that for money. It's just, throw it out there and be that special link in the body of Christ.
Yep. Andrew, let me run it by you. Here's a case scenario that I hear from a lot of different people, ministry leaders, is we sit down with the donor and we're putting our case statement, we're sharing with them. Donor says, great. How much do you need? How much do you know how to ask for someone? If you ask for too little, you might be insulting when you're sitting there, really? That's what you think it is for this meeting? If you ask too much, whoa, that's crazy. I can't believe you're asking that much. We just met each other. How do you determine what's the right amount?
Yeah. So here's conventional wisdom, and I'd love to hear what Pam has to say, because I worry about this conventional wisdom, but I've never seen it proven wrong. You can under ask in two ways. You can leave money on the table, and you can also sort of disappoint a donor. I wanted to do bigger than that, not more money, but bigger change than that. It's really hard to over ask is the conventional wisdom. Someone can be like, what? But they're so flattered that you think that they can give that kind of a gift. And we've never heard from somebody, and maybe we're just under asking for my 11 years of ministry career. I don't think so. But we've never heard someone say, "How dare you?" So now I will also say, do your homework and the legwork to understand. Homework and legwork can be just talking. And tell me about one of the biggest gifts you've ever given. What did it mean to you? What happened because of it? I mean, you start to jump into that stuff, you get a sense of their range, and you ought to know where your ministry fits into sort of their pecking order of passion. And so as you cultivate, you're learning about what that range might be, and you over ask a bit, and at least we try to, and not worry too much about a negative impact by going too much instead of too little. But I really want to. Can I throw that to Pam too? Is that what you hear too?
Yeah, I do. Okay. I totally agree with you. I mean, just like that's back to that not self-selecting out. I might have an idea of how much, or that it's coming out of a disposable income situation, but there's all sorts of revenue streams that different people might have that, certain things in their business isn't even impacting them. And I totally agree with you. I think they're happy to be asked. And if it's higher, that's,
Yeah.
But I would probably say also, Andrew, your predecessor, Barney Ford, taught me something that I have never forgotten. And so, Pam, Barney was the one who really coached me and developed me in terms of my understanding of fundraising. And he says, Tommy, a lot of times is when you make the ask, here's what I would recommend. Sit down with them and say, I really want to be able to honor your giving. What is an appropriate amount to ask you for? In light of the fact this is your first time gift, or I know that a lot of people are asking you, as we sit down today, what is the appropriate amount? And allow them to really come alongside and share it with you. He says, Tommy, you show that you are honoring them and really be able to ask them for permission. And many times it is more than the number that you ever have in mind.
Everything Barney Ford says is always right. And so I have nothing to add.
Yeah. And then Pam, I think a lot of times is going back to you with communications, is social media has become so prevalent these days. How does a person in communication, overseeing communications, what does social media play a role in it? Is it effective? Are you seeing a switch where fundraising is done more through social media now than ever before?
Yes and no. I mean, I would say it's definitely grown, and I would recommend that you find someone. If it's you, great, and you love social media and you consume it. If it's not you, find someone who does, that you can contract with or work with. There's so many really talented people who just love to specialize in that. Now, I love the storytelling. I love to connect with the heart of people, especially as high as possible on the kinds of themes that really move us. I think we are sit around the fire kind of people at heart. And so however you tell that story, that's what really interests me. I don't love social media. I will come out of the closet and say it just, personally, to consume it. I think it just steals our time and attention, maybe not necessarily always in the healthiest ways if people don't control it. I use Instagram. I love Instagram because I love images, and it's a really great platform for storytelling. So I kind of pick and choose what is right for that particular client. So I also have a business client, and we're zeroing in on LinkedIn and all the functionality there. So yes, I'm a fan, but I think looking at it as the end all be all is a mistake, because there are so many people who have a heart for your mission and they're not on it, or they're not engaged as much. So it kind of just really depends. I would stick with, again, know that audience, connect to their heart authentically of what they would like to do, then use that as a channel. Now, the peer-to-peer fundraising, and then a lot of the other things that can go viral, I love that component of social media. Just love it. And I usually find somebody who lives on social media and they love that, and they help us build that particular aspect of the program, because they know it. It's their oxygen. It might not be mine, so it would be a mistake for me to try to do it. But I know I definitely see the importance, but I still elevate the connecting with the heart the highest. So
a practical tip that Pam mentioned is that she does not resonate as much with social media at times. It's not like she's on Instagram and Facebook all of the time. And so with that said, especially if you're the only person on your team, don't do it, because it's just going to drain you and you're just going to avoid it. And so outsource it to someone who fits within your DNA and have them do it, because sometimes that person may love doing social media, may love creating messaging and all of that stuff, and you're working with them in light of the story as well too. Andrew, you tend to have a bigger team as well too. With Intervarsity, are you guys doing more and more fundraising on social media, or are you saying there, man, we're just using it to tell stories, but not as much fundraising?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're doing more and more, and that means it's 1/250th of our income right now. So more and more isn't a lot. More and more is just more and more. Now there are some. Well, you asked social media. Some of the college ministries are doing a kind of a melange of all kinds of communications activities, including direct mail, meaningfully to the point to the level of $20 million a year. We hang out around 1 million a year, and most of our work is face to face. But it is growing, and people are interested, and I think that the kind of the natural progression of things is you start telling stories to people wherever they are, and different generations are in different places, and then you realize there's an opportunity to invite people into something when they've heard a story, and that is a sort of a natural progression. But we're not great at it, and so we're not optimized in it.
Got it. Yeah. Go ahead, Pam.
I think I was going to say it, and like Andrew was saying, also it's part of that mix, and you're meeting people where they're at. I mean, at One Client Resource Global, they have we have somebody, we want to be talking from a global perspective too. So our social media person is in Jakarta, and she helps me out because she loves social media and she's really good at it and very creative. And also it helps our team be truly global. So, we're just starting to tap the surface, but.
Or a lot of times I've been talking with the city-to-city teams for Redeemer, and they said, look, we do not want this to be the Tim Keller show. Monday, we're going to have a Tim Keller sermon. Tuesday, we're going to have a quote from Tim Keller. So we've had to create voices other than Tim. Mm-hmm. And from that point on, share the work of other voices as you build the network as well, too. Yeah. Hey, let's just swing a little bit and talk about practical tips in terms of, Pam, let me start with you. When I say develop a communication schedule, what does that mean to you as you share with the audience?
Well, I think that's just the overall plan. I think what you mean. And I love, and my corporate training came in handy in the nonprofit world, because when you work with a corporation, and let's say you're outside consulting with them, you start with their business objectives, and you have to align your communications objectives to their business goals. And if not, you're fired, basically. So you have to have the communications be working to, support some overall goal. So I love to start there. Like if the goal of the ministry now is to raise money or to grow into a particular area or reach a certain population, or maybe bring on new staff, whatever it might be, starting there, our communications should work to help support the business goals. So I guess that's where I would start, and then back up from that to what we were talking about of the who do you need? What are the audiences that you need to achieve those goals? And now let's try to invite them onto the team, bring them on the journey. So I start with goals and objectives, strategies down to tactics. Then is the timeline that you mentioned. I think the timeline, it really comes at the end and you can plan it out and just extend it out through the year. I love to have a 1, 3, 5-year plan as best as possible because I find some people on your team get really interested and excited about the technical things we're going to do right now. And some people love the vision. So you're kind of giving them a little bit of both. In some of our communications meetings, we will talk about the practical thing we're working on that week, and then maybe bring in sort of a fun brainstorming topic, because some people want to stay motivated of sort of what's ahead and those kinds of things. But that's what I think you mean. Did I answer your question, Tommy,
Yep.
with the schedule?
And one more follow-up, and I want to turn to Andrew, is, especially with the communication, how often should you be communicating to your people, to your donors? Is it once a month emails? Is it every couple weeks? What would you say?
Okay, yeah, that's where I wasn't sure. I think you were getting kind of tactical that way. So when you have that plan, again, looking at those audiences, how do they like to be communicated to? I think about that. In a practical manner, if I had to just generalize, so I love the monthly rhythm for larger updates. So people have a sense of where you're going over the year. They kind of communicate. So we do for Research Global, for instance, we do a monthly newsletter. And then there's kind of a voice from the leader. So it's the monthly newsletter forwarded on to a select group of individuals with some more very personal thoughts. And that is that authentic communication. So they're not just getting the the general monthly communication. I mean, you can't handwrite to everyone. That would be lovely if we could, but you sort of give the majority of people that. And then there's a few people that need to stay closer to the mission. And so the founder can forward that email. So that's monthly. Social media, we set up a weekly calendar that had a pattern. So it varies throughout the month, but let's look at it this way. I'll give an example. Monday, we send a quote to start out the week. It's simple. We don't want to do more work on Monday. Again, that's just thinking about blessing them. It's something that helps tee up the week. So Monday is a quote. Tuesday might be information about a podcast that's coming up, or Wednesday could be the podcast itself that we post. Thursday, we usually post about events that are upcoming. And then Friday, again, is that quote or story or picture or something beautiful that sends them into the weekend. So that's kind of an example of how you could set up your social media, which can be sent out a lot more frequently. The email is once a month. And then trying to think of anything else. In the case of Research Global, it would be podcasts popping up all the time that we share in those. So I don't think overdo it. I would focus instead on quality over quantity, to be honest, so that everybody's inundated, everybody's getting too much to read and listen to. So I know one of my goals is that when people see our Research Global communication, they know, oh, okay, this one I could open. Yeah. This is going to be one of quality. They don't spam me. They're not just sending a bunch of garbage. It's well written, well put together. So less is more, and edit, I guess, would be the thing.
Yeah. Andrew, another practical question that I hear from a lot of different people, especially in the ministry aspect, is, you guys have talked to me, is when you sit down with a donor and make sure you document in your notes what that conversation was and next steps. Why is that important, Andrew?
Well, so you're on a mission with the donor, and we're walking down a path together. And if you step on the first cobblestone and then you come back a month later and you don't know what cobblestone you stepped on, you can't take the next step onto the next cobblestone. So you just start over again, right? So it also is it doesn't give dignity to the person you're speaking with. So they're giving you information about their lives and their investments and their passions, and so you want to know what that is. Think through in preparation for the next meeting what that might mean about their overlap with what you're offering, which is cultivation toward a kingdom impact. And then you can take that next step. And so I guess we call that moves management, if you want to be like super salesy, development-y guy. But really, what it is like understanding where the donor is and helping them move forward in the direction that they want to move until that they've made an impact they want to make, and then wash, rinse, and repeat. I mean, to understand the value of their impact, the report and the thanking that happens afterwards is the beginning of the next gift. So that's why you take notes. You take notes because you care deeply about what's going on with the donor. You're trying to help them get somewhere. If you don't know where you were, you don't know how to get somewhere else.
And Andrew, wouldn't say a lot of times it involves discipline. It's a little tedious because afterwards you don't want to sit there and type it all out, but it also benefits not only you, but everyone in the organization and the guys after you, because you don't want to keep going back to the same donor and says, okay, so how are your kids? Well, they graduated. And so, I mean, so what was your name? What do you do again? You just don't want to be that person.
No, and this is so easy for me to say because I don't have to take the notes after the meeting anymore. But transform your thinking from I got to do the paperwork to I can't wait to figure out what I can do with this person. Lord, what do you have for them that will bring them joy and make a kingdom impact? That's cool.
Yeah,
you take a note for that. Yeah.
Hey, actually, Pam, I'll have to tell you, one of your former teammates, one time I sat down with them and I asked them this question. So tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me about your kids and what you're doing and everything. And he says to me, surely you probably didn't do your homework before meeting with me.
Oh, well.
So I've learned to really be able to watch and how to navigate through some of those conversations.
Yeah.
No, that's so true. And Andrew's so right. I mean, it's just got to be, you have to be listening, and it's okay I forget that stuff all the time. I mean, I have little crib notes all the time where I'm like, has 2 children, and I put the name down and everything because I just forget. And it doesn't mean I don't care. But I do feel so good then to go into that conversation, having to review that. I feel like I'm right back where we just ended.
Yeah. But with that, so wouldn't you say, guys, I mean, when I say document your notes, does not mean you put it in an Excel spreadsheet. You got to find a good CMS system that is company-wide that everyone has access to see some of those, not the private notes, because if it's on your personal spreadsheet, once you leave, the whole thing is gone. If something happens to you, the whole thing disappears.
Well, we're a 78 or 9-year-old organization. That's $125 million a year. And this June, we installed our first CRM.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I agree. And I still have egg on my face for not having done it way earlier.
Pam, let me ask you a quick question, and then I'll go back to Andrew. I hear so many different ministry leaders who says, man, we're just doing good work. I just don't have time to communicate or share people what's going on. What would you say to that person?
I don't understand that, but no, I think it's that bridge, that position is the bridge again. You have to, you're blessing the work that you're doing by sharing the story. I mean, it's not just for fundraising. I remember Gary Haugen at IJM talking about it as the stories are blessings. I mean, it is to bless all the people who want to be involved in the work of justice in the world. Yes, we use it in fundraising, but we used it in a lot of different ways. Also, just to tell those stories, because to tell the truth, to tell stories of what God is doing in the world, the redeeming work He's doing in the world is blessing, and it's part of that body of Christ. And as storytellers, you have that particular role. So, I mean, take aside just the practical nature of that. And in fact, starting at IJM, I was like one of the first communications people, and they were all lawyers. And so you can imagine that's like, no comment, don't tell any story. They were doing this wonderful work. And I said, but we have to tell these stories. This is part of what is going to bring people in. And they knew that. But I guess I'd rather work for an organization that values the work over just the storytelling, to be sure. And it's sort of your role in the storytelling function to help those wonderful frontline workers understand that maybe they need to pause, take a moment to share this story, because it will bless others and actually grow the mission. And one way to do that we did that is as part of their monthly reporting. They might be reporting on different metrics. They had to sort of kick in a story or two. That was actually part of their sort of job description now. And not surprising, I'm biased to storytelling, but of course, as time went on, the field leaders found that that was their favorite part of the report. That they really got into it, and they loved telling the stories. So it was just kind of getting that baked into the part of your organization.
And so for those who are listening in or who will listen to this recording, here's what tangibly also a lot of times what Pam would say is, and Pam speak into this, is sometimes you could get overwhelmed by the communication part. And so if you wait until the end of the month, it becomes more overwhelming. Do a little bit each day. And maybe once a week, especially these days, do a Zoom call, or in the future, go with your iPhone, do a quick interview, or then you could do a little bit each day so that you don't feel like you're burdened every week or every month to do it, because then you just don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah. And I think that's back to that meeting people where they're at and where they like to be communicated with. And it's totally different. I wish there was a one size fits all. And as Andrew probably knows, it's just not. I mean, some people, I think because social media is so easy and convenient and expected, it's nice for the people that's their oxygen. They're on social media to just a little bit all the time. That's a great way to do more. And then, probably the supporters and donors, they want either one big conversation or they would like one big printed book at the end of the month or whatever it is. And I respect that too. I mean, so we've just kind of, as best as you can, you find different ways to communicate to those different people. And I found also that some people really just want to hear stories about the one individual. And then we tested this along the way at IJM, actually. And some people didn't want to hear anything about the one in the story, and they loved the numbers. They wanted to know about sustainable impact. So,
yeah,
we kind of, in each communication, had a little bit of both. So,
Andrew, let me ask you a quick question, especially when I say the word fundraising and data analytics, you guys are on the cutting edge. What does that mean to you? Explain a little bit how you guys have integrated data into your whole pattern of fundraising.
Yeah, I think that speaking to the right people at the right time about the right thing is like a lot of it, maybe half of it. Because if you have a great major gifts team and they're focused on the second tier because you don't know who the first tier are, then you do half as well as you might otherwise do, even though you've got a great major gifts team. So how do we identify who needs what kind of support? I mean, so we've segmented our development department by level of engagement with Intervarsity. So we know that there are about 30 million people who are interested in college ministry and serious about their faith, and we know 18 million of them don't know us. Well, we're not going to have major gift conversations with them. That'll be social media and marketing and storytelling and kind of invitation into the fold. And then if you go in 3 or 4 circles, well, we also have 9,000 people who have given every year for 20 years. Well, those people want to talk about an estate gift because what you've done all your life, you want to do in your legacy also. And so you use data analysis to determine who gets what kinds of conversation and what kinds of story. I mean, even age can really bifurcate the kinds of stories that we tell, or even the language you use around the same story. And so the first thing we did when I came to Intervarsity was we did a data analysis that said, who are the people who have given a gift more than $50,000 and how are they alike to each other, but different from the rest of the database? And then when we found the 7 things, we looked into the rest of the database and found all those people who have those 7 things, but yet hadn't become a major donor, and began to speak to them. And that's what launched our scaling up of our major donor operation, because we knew who to talk to.
Yeah.
And the correlation was really strong. So it worked. So that's just an example of the importance of data analysis to pick the right people to talk about the right things.
2 questions for each one of you that's unique. For an organization, Andrew, I'll start with you. At what point does an organization, medium-sized organization, need to hire a director of development? And how does that director of development effectively work with the executive director or president? And I'll ask you the same thing with communications, Pam.
Is this another 90-minute session we're about to do? I think you need to hire a director of development as soon as the organization is cohesed enough and the vision is big enough that you need to raise significant gifts to make it happen. Mm-hmm. Then the return on investment for that director of development can be high enough, and they can create the income to drive the kingdom impact. Now that's a little bit kind of 40,000 feet in strategic thinking. It really depends on what kind of organization. I mean, Intervarsity needed a director of development right away because every staff raises their own funds. So someone needs to train them, right?
Yeah.
So it's different from organization to organization for sure. Now, once you have one and you have, and I'll say especially a major gift operation, the president becomes absolutely critical. And so when Intervarsity started to do this, the president's job description changed. And now the president spends 25% of their time with major donors because the most significant gifts come in part from the credibility that comes from trusting in the president and understanding that being able to hear the vision from the president because they feel like there's some sort of credibility that will happen as well. And so for those keystone gifts, the president really needs to be involved.
Got it. Pam, what about you? Director of Communications, at what point do you begin to say you're an executive director, you're a president of a small organization? As you get bigger, at what point do you realize I need to hire someone to oversee communications?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I would just echo a lot of what Andrew said. And, once the operations is growing at such a way that you need to sustain that, I think also if you have a really specialized ministry or group that are so focused on the work, but nobody's turning back on that bridge and talking to the rest of the body of Christ or the community or whatever to talk about that work, it can get lopsided very quickly. And as I said before, I'm happy. And in my experience, it's been sometimes a tough role to push because they want to hire a whole bunch of other roles. And I understand that more in the field operations. But if you neglect the communications or fundraising for too long, it just gets a little lopsided. Yeah. And then you're not really honoring the work that's going on in the field. You want to sustain that. You want to build that engine, and that's just a vital part of the whole machine. So I'm going to say sooner than later. I don't know the exact amount, but definitely when you start to get some operations that need the sustainability, you need the fundraising and communications.
Especially in this day and age, I think a lot of times communication becomes the key to both major donors as well as individual donors and creating awareness. Communication more so than ever before, because guys, I always thought that, hey, look, I'm going to do the best I can and people are going to see it and then people are going to support it. Yeah, that doesn't work. I had to learn how to communicate that. And as an Asian, I'm not used to it because I'm used to just putting my head down and doing my work. I had to learn how to communicate that.
That's so true. And that's what I mean by the people that are doing the work in the field, the hard work. They're often people like that. They just want to put their head down. They don't want to share it. And personally, I'd rather have that in an organization that I'm supporting than some clients I've seen or businesses, even in my corporate life, where they had a gigantic, marketing machine and the actual product or the thing was sort of, not much. So it's nice to have that problem where you just have people head down working, but for too long, if you don't get someone in there to tell the stories, it'll not, help their work flourish.
Yeah. And Andrew, on my end, I think a lot of times, it's even for me in terms of donor development, for the longest time early for the first couple of years, I was scared of doing donor development. I was scared of rejection. As an Asian, I'm scared of making the ask. I didn't want to inconvenience them. I didn't want to disrespect them. And so I never really asked, or I really went around or did it passively. I've learned in the last couple of years is I just have to learn to honor them, but be direct and also be able to be willing to listen to both no and yes at the same time.
Yeah, you know what, Tommy? This is a point we should have brought up before the 54-minute mark. So much of major donor engagement is cross-cultural. So you're experiencing ethnic cross-culture. That makes perfect sense. But there's also age cross-culture, so socioeconomic cross-culture. There's very often these days partisan cross culture, which can be really political partisan, which can be a really powerful experience that no one's teaching us right now how to cross. There's lots of crossing culture stuff going on. And so I think in our field, and if not our country ubiquitously, learning how to cross culture and extend grace and love and listen well and not what we call red line is really, really important.
Yep. Hey, we're almost done. Andrew, I know you have to run. Any last thoughts for both you guys as we wrap up here? Andrew, I'll start with you.
Well, this is a joy. Thanks, Tommy, for including me. I think the one thing I'll highlight again is almost going back to the beginning. Your mission really matters. So because your mission really matters, it's worth figuring out how to communicate what kind of impacts you're making now and why they're urgent, and beginning to communicate that well and invite people into the kingdom impact through giving. It's worth it. There's no need to shy away. Givers want to give, and when there's trouble, they want to give even more.
Got it. Pam, last words, last thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to edit down. I was copying a Bob Dahl practice of having like the 5 things, the 7 things. He's still great with his list. So we covered some of them. So now that we're wrapping up, I'll shorten it. But one of the things I didn't mention, especially if you're a smaller ministry, is getting together with the people who are the major donor teams. I see so much disconnect between communications sometimes and the major donor teams. Communications will have something really creative and it's wonderful and it's a really good idea, but it might not be speaking to where the major donor team needs the communications to speak to. So I think them having a essential seat at the table of all your communications and marketing is essential. It seems like they would naturally link up and they don't always do. But the major donor frontline team has the world of information to give. I don't know. I think this season just really showing, not telling. We always say show, don't tell. And if you can just get out of the way and bring people as close as possible to whatever it is in your ministry, the frontline workers, the people you're impacting, what's keeping the director motivated and exciting despite all the challenges in this season? That's what I want to know when I'm giving, like, where's the glimmer of hope? And I think we tend to just go to a bias of hope. And I think humans are wired that way by God. We tend to gravitate to hope over despair. And it's that story of the concrete and then that plant that breaks through. I still love that one. I mean, it seems impossible. And yet here comes that bit of grass through all of that concrete. And I think that those are the stories that you look for right now in this kind of very strange year. And people will appreciate that honest look.
Pam, Andrew, we are out of time. Thank you so much. The goal of the Grow Center is continue to really be able to develop these entrepreneurial ministry leaders, because the role of the pastor and ministry leaders looks very different. But one of the things that we have to talk about is funding your ministry. And tomorrow, Pastor Jackson Crum will talk about funding your church. And so it just looks different. It's hard conversations. We don't always want to talk about that, but it's something that we have to talk about in terms of money and communications to really be able to keep the ministry going. So, hey, follow us on our website, www.thegrowcenter.com, and on Instagram and Facebook at growcenter.network. Andrew, I know you have a meeting. Pam, I know you also have a meeting. And so we'll talk soon, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Tommy. Thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bye, everyone.